Alright, so this video is not necessarily meant to be a full review of Daredevil Born Again. At this point, there are plenty of great YouTube videos out there already that have reviewed the show, so go and check those videos out. I'll of course give my general thoughts about it, which is answering the question, did I like Season 1? Yes, I loved it. I thought it was great. Especially the cinematography, which is where I feel like the increase in budget from Netflix to Disney was very apparent. However, that doesn't mean I loved everything about it. Right from the beginning, I was quite disappointed. Since the show debuted during Ramadan, I held off on watching on time when the weekly episodes were coming out. So I found out much later that Foggy was brought back just to be killed off. This was something I brought up in my previous video about Daredevil, and I incorrectly predicted that Karen was going to be the one to die, not him. Deborah Ann Woll has already been confirmed to return for Season 2. I am very upset that Foggy was killed off for several reasons, and even though I wasn't around when the first episode premiered, I imagine that everyone else's sadness and outrage were similar to what I felt when I watched it several weeks later. But okay, fine. If Matt needed to suffer a painful loss and they decided to have that loss be Foggy, then fine, be that as it may. But it could have been handled so much better. First of all, why in the world did he not have a funeral scene? In Season 1, the biggest loss that the characters suffered was Ben Urich, and a funeral scene in the finale was definitely warranted then. But Ben wasn't the first major death of the show. That was Elena Cardenas, and her death is what ultimately drove Matt to a near-death experience fighting Nobu and then Kingpin right after. There was even a funeral scene for Grotto in Season 2, and even though our main characters were the only ones in attendance, I felt like a funeral for him was meaningful because it showed that they actually did care about him and mourned his loss. The next and possibly most significant funeral scene was Father Lantom's in the finale of Season 3, which was also the overall finale of the Netflix original show. Foggy Nelson is just as deserving and probably the most deserving of a funeral scene as previous characters' passings. So why didn't he have one? Did they really think that a funeral scene would have felt redundant since there was already a funeral scene for the cop that died? If that's the case, I'm just gonna go ahead and say that that is not a good enough reason to have not given Foggy a fully proper send-off. Moving forward, I'm gonna miss Foggy so much. I loved Eldon Henson's delivery of comic relief and everything that had gone on with the character before. He was the perfect fold for Matt Murdock, the man without fear, who has the alter ego as a blind ninja with supersonic senses. Now, second of all, where the hell is Marci? Why wasn't she the one at the bar with Foggy in the opening scenes at Josie's? What's the explanation here for not bringing Amy Rutberg back? It's not just a fan's sentiment anymore to believe that Born Again is meant to be Season 4. Vincent D'Onofrio himself said that he considers the show to be exactly that.
Is this show set in the same universe as the Netflix show?
For sure.
100%. Okay.
I'd consider it a fourth season.
And before anyone says that Marci was not important enough to bring back, let me point out a few facts of the Daredevil original Netflix show. Marci was a supporting character all throughout Seasons 1 through 3. In the first season, she assisted Nelson and Murdock with incriminating Kingpin. In Season 2, Foggy goes to her for help with the Punisher case, the new trial of the century. In Season 3, she provided moral support to Foggy when he wanted to run for district attorney, even though the Kingpin had a foothold in his family's business. In all of that calamity, Foggy proposed to Marci, which she basically said yes to, but told him that she wanted him to propose again later properly. And moving on from that, she was at Father Lantom's funeral, and she was also in the final scene of the show at the Nelson meat shop where Karen writes down the names Foggy, Nelson, and Paige, which we of course see a sign for in the first episode of this show. So as someone who is a hardcore fan of the Netflix original, how could I just ignore the fact that they didn't bring Marci back? Why have Matt and Karen gossip about Foggy flirting with a new character, Kirsten McDuffie, at Josie's bar, when they could have just had brought Amy Rutberg back and had Marci there at the bar with him? Foggy proposed to Marci in Season 3. She was there until the very end of Season 3, and bringing her back would have been perfect for Born Again for a multitude of reasons. The first reason being that after Foggy's heart beats its last beat, it should have been Marci grieving over his dead body, not Karen. No woman loved Foggy more than Marci. No person loved Foggy more than Marci, and I think Amy Rutberg did a good job of conveying that. It could have even been Marci testifying against Bullseye in the following courtroom scene because it would have been important to show how enraged a widow would be against the killer of her husband. They could have even shown that Foggy had become a family man and had a son, named him Matt Nelson after his best friend, which would have made his death feel that much more tragic. And for storytelling purposes, with the time that had passed, they could have even had Marci become Matt's new law partner, which would have therefore had Matt's law firm retain the name Nelson and Murdoch, attorneys at law, given the fact that Marci would have taken Foggy's last name. That would have greatly expanded Marci's role in the show and continued the legacy of the law firm, Nelson and Murdoch, and what it stood for, instead of making up a new law firm which Matt partners into, Murdoch and McDuffie. Now I just want to point out that this isn't to throw any shade at Nikki M. James. I think she was very good in her role as Kirsten, and she definitely deserved to be on the show. She could have been another person in Matt and Marci's law firm, having it eventually become Nelson, Murdoch, and McDuffie. Or maybe Nelson, McDuffie, and Murdoch.
Sounds better. You think? Yeah, trust me.
I like the character and I like the actress, so don't get it twisted. I just didn't like how her role was basically substituting Marci. Her role was filled by a character that could have been filled with a character that already existed. I felt the same exact way with Cherry replacing Brett Mahoney. So yeah, the majority of complaints about this season stem from the foundation set forth in the first episode. After Daredevil tried to kill Bullseye on the roof of Josie's, Cherry discovers his secret identity. But Cherry is a new character. Personally, I felt absolutely no weight when Daredevil's identity was revealed to Cherry. Now, keep everything about this scene the same, but replace Cherry with Brett Mahoney, and the whole entire context changes. Leaving Brett out of Daredevil Born Again bothered me just as much as leaving Marci out. And before naysayers start coming at me again saying that Brett wasn't important enough to bring back, let me start listing out some facts about Brett from the Netflix show, just like I did with Marci. Brett was there in the very first episode of Daredevil Season 1. And he was there in the very last episode of Daredevil Season 3. In his first appearance, we see that he was childhood friends turned professional rivals with Foggy, which would mean that his death would hit really close to home for Brett too. He often had run-ins with Matt and Foggy throughout Season 1, but in the Season 1 finale, he was the one who gave Daredevil his superhero name.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Hey, so what am I supposed to call you when I file my report?
Daredevil. That's what they're calling him now.
That was a really big deal. And the list goes on. In Season 2, he had more run-ins with the superhero vigilante Daredevil, and eventually, it even became a point of contention.
I just want to help, Sergeant.
No, you can't help. You're the problem. Because of you, the uniform means dick. Cops are no longer preventing crime, we're just chasing it. Mopping up the mess that you people leave in your wake.
We're on the same side, you and I.
You're on your own side.
I think Season 2 might have been occurring chronologically at the same time as the events of Captain America's Civil War were unfolding. Throughout the show, we see Brett climbing the ladder of the NYPD police force and getting promoted. By Season 3, the cops hate Kingpin, while the FBI is corrupted and working for him. Brett was there for Matt and Foggy to help shelter Nadeem and his family, who I pointed out in the previous video was basically a main character. And Brett was there after the epic climax of Season 3, when Kingpin was defeated yet again. He was the one who identified Bullseye as the fake Daredevil and pointed out the real one.
He isn't the real Daredevil.
How do you know?
Because he is.
Which was almost a callback to Season 1 since again, he was the one who gave Daredevil his superhero name. He was the one who shoved Kingpin into the police car when he was arrested in the following scene. Moving forward, he was there at Father Lantham's funeral, just like Marci. Now I have to say again, this is absolutely not meant to throw any shade to Clark Johnson. He is a fantastic actor. He was in The Wire, which is the greatest TV show I've ever seen. He was also in Bosch, which I only started watching because Jamie Hector, who played Marlo in The Wire, also starred in it. So Clark Johnson definitely has the resume for a role in the MCU, and even on Daredevil Born Again. But he effectively just replaced Brett Mahoney, just like how Kirsten replaced Marci Nelson. I guess Royce Johnson was telling the truth when he said he didn't get a phone call from Marvel. I'm just as sad about his absence as I am about Amy Rutberg's absence, but not bringing Brett back is arguably worse since he is a character from the comics. Marci at the very least was an original character, like Darcy Lewis, who debuted in Thor and had an ongoing character arc and was brought back for WandaVision. Brett had an ongoing character arc too, over the 3 seasons of the original Netflix show. And because he's known Matt the lawyer for so long, and he's worked with Daredevil the superhero for such a long time, even giving him the superhero name, there would have been actual weight that the OG returning audience members like myself would have felt to seeing Brett find out Daredevil's secret identity. And speaking of Nadeem, who I talked about at length in my previous Daredevil video, I mentioned that they could have made a connection between him and Miss Marvel if they wanted to, since they're both Pakistani. I only said that, but I wasn't expecting anything. No mention of Nadeem or connection to Miss Marvel in this show. But lo and behold, we had a whole episode dedicated to Yusuf Khan, Miss Marvel's father, as a supporting character. So that was cool to see. And I will admit, it would definitely be a stretch of fan service to have also expected a connection between Nadeem and Miss Marvel, but honestly, I think it would have been pretty easy to pull off. Matt went into the bank for a loan on his law firm, and for whatever reason, Yusuf decides not to grant it to him then, which is whatever. But all it could have taken was one line in the dialogue, with Yusuf saying something like he had a younger cousin named Seema who married a man named Rahul Nadeem and had a son, Sammy. He would go on to say that he knows about how Matt and his late associate Foggy did their best to try to help Nadeem in court several years ago, which led to his death, but also saved the lives of Seema and Sammy. And for that reason, Yusuf would consider the bank loan and get back to him. Again, I know that it would be a stretch of fan service, but that's all really that they needed to do. That would have made it a nice callback to Nadeem's sacrifice in Season 3, and it would have been an instance of connecting the two shows, just like bringing Brett and Marci back would have. But instead, the only very slight and indirect reference we got of Nadeem was one line that Kingpin says to Matt about keeping his promise about the deal he made. That's it. One character that I did not mention in my previous video but who I saw a lot of fan requests for returning was Turk. Compared to the other characters I talked about, Turk is even more of a minor character, but I was pleasantly surprised to see fan support for another Netflix character's return. And mind you, Turk was not original but also from the comics. By episode 4, Kirsten tells Matt to go downtown and defend Leroy Bradford, a character who was a victim of the police abusing their power, even though Leroy himself has a long rap sheet. Now, as this character's part continued on, I started thinking, you know what? A character going through something like this would have been a perfect opportunity for bringing Turk back. He never had any run-ins with Matt Murdock the attorney, but he's had plenty of run-ins with Daredevil the superhero. So with Matt showing up to defend a character like this, I feel like Turk would have fit this role in the story perfectly. It would have been an interesting irony because from Matt's perspective, Turk is someone whose ass he's kicked numerous times, but now he's seeking the same person out in the daytime in a suit and tie instead of devil horns. And it would have been especially funny for Matt since he knows about it and not Turk. He was that character always getting himself into trouble.
Listen, man, maybe just let a brother go, huh? Come on, D. I missed Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, it didn't miss you.
Fine. You know what? Be like that. Because we both know I'll be back out by the end of the month.
I'll see you then.
Once more though, I gotta point out, this has nothing to do with Charlie Hudson III. In fact, during his performance, he actually really got me thinking about the real-world system, especially when the topic of cost was brought up between what the government was giving him in food stamps versus keeping him locked up, and the latter being what his fate was, even though it would cost the system more. And I thought these characters not being brought back would have been the end of it. But unfortunately, we also have to talk about the absence of Sister Maggie. Now, even though this character wasn't around as long as the other ones, you can make the case that her absence is even more bizarre. First of all, to state the obvious, she is Matt's mother. I can't believe this has to be pointed out, but this was a massive revelation in Season 3. Matt finally got to embrace a reality that his mom is not only alive, but now involved in his life in some capacity, albeit the way he found out broke his heart even more. But the very last scene between these two characters was somewhat heartwarming. Aside from being his mother, it seems like Sister Maggie was going to fill the role that Father Lantom had on the show previously based on this conversation.
Father Lantom used to help me see the errors of my ways. I could use someone else to help me with that now.
I'm a nun, Matthew. Helping is what I was called to do.
In episode 5, Matt only mentions that he didn't know about his mother until much later in his life, but that's all we got, was a mention of her. Now, in the grand scheme of things, I also know that the disappointments I'm mentioning don't really matter. Marvel and Disney's end goal isn't about retaining the original Netflix Daredevil fanbase, but to bring in and lock in as many new incoming fans who are into the overarching MCU narrative as a whole. With that being their end goal, I'm sure that Season 1 is gonna be seen as successful on all levels. Maybe other OG fans aren't as upset as me, and maybe newer fans don't even care about the old series to even entertain the premise of this video. But I still have a right to an opinion. I still love the original show, so I have a right to feel disappointed at the huge lack of connection this show has to the previous one. The studio had all the opportunities at their disposal to bring these characters back. Most of them have expressed interest in coming back, and I do not believe for a second that it was a matter of money that they did not bring the actors back, because I'm pretty sure that Nikki M. James and Clark Johnson are getting paid better than Amy Rutberg and Royce Johnson were getting paid, respectively. I can't prove it, but it just makes sense. Everything budget-wise about this show is an upgrade from Netflix to Disney+. Now, there is the very slight, small, less than 1% chance that some of these characters could return for Season 2, but first of all, as I just pointed out, the chance of that happening might as well be non-existent. And second of all, if they were to bring these characters back, then their lack of appearance before that will be even more apparent, with plot holes unable to fill the gaps in the story organically. And I'm the type of person who never lets these things go. Game of Thrones ended 6 years ago, and I hate the ending just as much as I did back then. No amount of time has made it any better. Mass Effect 3 came out over a decade ago, and it's still the worst ending ever. No amount of time undoes my hatred. So these criticisms that I have of Daredevil Born Again Season 1 will forever remain my criticisms of this show so far. And if you're someone who's fine with the things I complained about, or just don't care about the things I complained about, then that's fine. More power to you. But for everyone who agrees with me, this video is just to point out that we're disappointed, and we have a right to be disappointed. That's all. I know that a lot of the creative overhaul involved reshoots and scenes tacked on to episodes 1, 8, and 9. At the very least, they still could have brought Marci back for just episode 1 in that case. The biggest insult to injury is the fact that they brought back Susan Varen, who is Josie's actress. I mean, that was cool, but if they did that, they definitely could have also brought back Marci, among others. And as for the rest, if they thought that reshooting a lot more of the scenes would be just too much of a hassle just to bring back more Netflix characters, then I'll be the first to say that it would have been worth the friggin' hassle. There is a fan theory out there about how Foggy might still be alive, but one of Daredevil's superpowers that we see him flexing all the time is his supersonic sense of hearing, and specifically hearing heartbeats. So he would have heard Foggy's heart beat its last beat. Unless his heart started beating again in the ambulance after Daredevil stopped listening. And then Foggy goes into some witness protection program. If that's the route they decide to go, then that would make it the third time in this series that a character dies after what's supposed to be the scene of their death. The first was Nobu, then Elektra, and now Foggy, if this rumor turns out to be true. But you know what? that's still better than bringing Foggy back just to kill him. Hopefully season 2 will have more of the Netflix influence from the creative overhaul, so if that means there's a higher than a 1% chance of bringing characters like Marci and Brett back, then I'll take it. The actors want to be back, so bring them back. If you watched this video all the way to the end, thank you very much. I always do appreciate it when people tune into my videos. What did you think about Daredevil Born Again Season 1? Comment below with your thoughts, and until next time, holla at your boy.